Here we go. Well, welcome everybody to the January 2022 Ministry Forum. Today we have a special presentation by Landon and also co-hosted by Carrie Breedlove, our leader of the Ministry Forum. And this is a monthly forum that we do every month. And I'll let Carrie tell you a little bit more about what we do.
Great. Thank you, Eric. And thank you so much to Landon for being with us. I'm going to introduce him here in a second. I'm Carrie Breedlove. I am a licensed professional counselor, and I'm based out of the Denton, Lake Dallas area in North Texas. And I see women going through life transition and life loss, helping them to find joy on their unchosen journey through Christian-based therapy, and I practice Breedlove counseling. And I love connecting with ministry leaders, lay leaders, and we really wanted to have a place for ministry leaders of any kind, whether they're in a volunteer capacity all the way to a pastoral staff, to really connect with mental health related information. And that's really what the Spiritual Care Network is about, is bringing faith leaders and mental health providers together to bridge that gap between the two. And so that's what the Ministry Leader Forum is about. And we're going to be having a special topic each month. And so here in January, there is awareness months. And so January is bringing awareness to the issue of human trafficking, which is a really serious issue across the world. And Landon does a lot of work in this area, and he and I have known each other for a while and have worked together in the past. And so we wanted to have him on to share a little bit on this topic. So Landon is a licensed professional counselor, and he is the director of clinical services with Ranch Hand Rescue. We'll let him share a little bit more about what all that is here in a moment. And he has been gracious enough to come and share the information with us. He has a lot of experience in treating trauma across the lifespan, including inpatient and residential risk of harm assessments, suicide loss, and a variety of different kinds of support groups. And is also trained in equine and animal assisted counseling. So if that's something of interest in, he's a great person to connect with on that, as well as EMDR and DBT therapy, a variety of different techniques that are helpful for individuals who are experiencing trauma. And so we're so glad to have you with us, Landon. Thank you so much for joining us and being here.
Sure, thank you. So I want to first apologize. Our safe house is right by the train tracks, so every now and then you get a really loud train. Also, I apologize. I'm actually in my truck for this call because I just got off a phone call. There's actually a really tragic context, but one of the survivors that we have in our house is actually a dog. He was sexually abused by the police officer who had custody of him. Just mind-boggling that, and it's an open FBI case, and so we're trying to find a trainer with history working with this particular breed of dog. And I was on the phone with a gentleman who was former DEA, and I think is going to be a good fit for helping him with his recovery. So, Ranch Hands Rescue, we're all about recovery for everybody, and that includes species that are non-human. So we have horses and dogs and cats and pigs and sheep and goats and llamas. Like, we got a big pack ourselves, a big herd. And in the course of doing that work, we added a counseling program, which is for individuals who've been through trauma and not gotten better. And we partner these animals that have been through trauma in therapy with these people who've been through trauma. And the course of doing that work has then led to the opening of Bob's House of Hope, which is the first safe house in the country for young men who've been sex trafficked. Our whole focus has always been filling gaps in the community. So there was not a place for abused, neglected farm animals to go live out their lives safely and in recovery. We provided that. There's not a place for individuals with trauma who have not gotten better in other more traditional settings. We opened that. And then now this safe house, there's a couple in the country for minor males, but there's nothing once you're 18 and up. And so we opened that, and we're poised to expand this year. We're planning to open a 20-bed facility to try to further meet the need. And we hope to open multiple homes because the needs that we've identified extend beyond just biological male. There's the transgender youth, autism, IDD. That's a huge high risk population, unfortunately. So I can go into more detail on that, but I just wanted to give y'all some context of who I am and what brings me here. Thank you, Carrie and Eric, for hosting me. As far as the like kind of high level 1,000 foot of human trafficking, what it is and what we're doing about it. Human trafficking is the sale of human bodies through force, fraud, or coercion, particularly as adults. If you're a minor, you don't have to have the force, fraud, or coercion component. They're already highly influenceable, and it's already a crime if they're a minor. And so human trafficking, broadly speaking, is anything that falls under that umbrella of the sale of a human body. So it's modern day slavery. Then you get into specifics. There's labor trafficking and there's sex trafficking. Labor trafficking involves the force of labor specifically. So whether that's mowing lawns or that's working in a coal mine, it doesn't matter. Like any forced labor situation is considered human trafficking. Sex trafficking is specifically involves the exchange of sex for money, or some other goods, service, if you will. I mean, drugs technically falls under that. So typically what you're going to see, especially for these high risk populations, is dual trafficking. So they're being labor trafficked during the day and sex trafficked at night. In the traditional sense, sex trafficking is going to involve a pimp, right? We've all heard those terms, or a prostitute, we've heard those terms, but it's gotten a little bit more confusing now in the modern era, and especially with COVID. There's a lot of young people in particular essentially trafficking themselves online. They don't really realize that that's what's happening, but they're the third party seller, the pimp, if you will, is the app or the website. Some of you may have heard of OnlyFans and heard of Pornhub and things like that, where people create content for themselves and then share it online. Well, the issue there is that they're getting paid for it, and a lot of them are actually minors, so that's already illegal and that's already sex trafficking. But what tends to happen is that they get started there and then they meet up with somebody, and that somebody ends up being a trafficker, and then they drug them up, they put them out on the streets, they're being sold to 10 people a day, and then that's when things get really, really dark and awful. And so our whole focus is recovery resources for individuals. There's a lot of great programs out there doing some really wonderful work. And where we saw our opportunity to fill a need is, again, to open the safe house for young men who've been sex trafficked, but then also to raise awareness that it happens to boys too, and that based on the research we've done, it's up to 50% of sex trafficked minors are male. And that's something a lot of people don't realize.
Yeah, and Landon, as we're also reaching to, the churches and places that, there are children, there are teens, are there things that individuals in churches should be looking out for, should be alerted to pick up on if something like this is going on, or if their teen or child may be at risk?
Yeah, absolutely. That is a great question. So one of the things that I always tell people, and Carrie can second this, is that this is true for sex trafficking, for trauma, for suicide, any high risk situation. It's noticing a change in behavior. If a kid has been going to school and doing their work and just getting along great with friends and family, and then all of a sudden they're doing things completely different. They're spending a lot of time in their room. They're giving away stuff. They're showing up with new people that you've never seen before. You need to probe, right? You need to look into it, because something has changed, right? Something has happened to cause that shift. People don't just do that, make those big changes for no reason. There's something has happened. So the first thing I always mention is a change in behavior. Definitely always investigate that. And we also, just to be clear, we want to think of horses, not zebras. And what I mean by that is, when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, don't think zebras. So think something more common rather than something more rare. So just because there's been a change in behavior, that doesn't mean that it's sex trafficking or that they're suicidal. It just means you need to investigate, right? You need to look into it and see what's going on and ask questions, open a dialogue. And the sooner you do that, the better, because you'll get to the bottom of it more quickly, and they'll be less likely to have the defenses up because it's early on in whatever the change is. So specific to sex trafficking and human trafficking, you're going to want to look for communication with individuals who you don't know and they don't know. So typically it's going to be online. The average age that a male is solicited online is 15, and for girls it's 14. It can start much younger than that, but it's typically between ages 13 and 15 is where you're going to start seeing that online solicitation and communication. So for boys in particular, it's going to be gaming platforms is a very common interaction site, and that it's amazing what they're capable of. I learned this the hard way here at the Safe House, and we've since sorted it out. But apparently, the Nintendo Switch and the little DS, the little handheld thing, apparently those can look up porn sites. I didn't know that. They can also get on messaging boards through those, and I didn't know that. I learned that from talking to our cybersecurity expert, and so we of course immediately took care of it. But these are the things that we don't think about unless we're in that world, of gaming and of the online communication platforms. So the again, the keys are looking for that communication online, and trying to monitor that and check in on that. Uh, Specifics of what it might look like in externally would be if they're showing up with unexplained money. That's something that's a big red flag. If they're showing up with multiple cell phones, that's another big red flag. Showing up with new clothes or like any kind of new expensive individual items. So even in the policing world, like they're not going to be looking for a new house, right? Or even necessarily a new car. They're going to be looking for smaller, nice new things. They're going to have, like I said, new 2 or 3 new cell phones. They're going to have brand new clothes, new shoes, new jewelry. They might have a new gaming device, anything like that that's just showing up out of nowhere and you don't know how that came to pass. If they're showing up with new marks on them of some sort, whether that be a bruise or a cut or especially a tattoo, because branding tattoos are a common way for traffickers to obtain a sense of ownership over the individual. And so again, this can happen to anybody and at any age. And the challenge here is that it's happening in every community. So I mean, there's reports from just in our local communities. I mean, there's Plano, throughout Collin County, throughout in Flower Mound, throughout Denton County, Fort Worth, Dallas. Like it's everywhere. This isn't something that's happening in another country and then coming here. This is in our own backyards. And so those are kind of the things that you want to look for and just be aware that it can happen to kids that are of, a high socioeconomic status. And it can happen to kids of any race, any nationality, any ethnicity, any sexual orientation. I will say GLBTQ youth are at the highest risk. And part of that is because they often end up homeless. And so that increases their risk, unfortunately. But really, I mean, we've seen a variety of different individuals. There's straight men that are being trafficked, and they go gay for pay to get their needs met. And when I say needs, I'm using that kind of loosely because when you're addicted to drugs, that becomes a need as well, to fulfill that. And that's one of the ways that traffickers will get somebody involved in that world is by hooking them on a substance. So, I guess, where I'm going with that is that if you see somebody presenting with addiction or they're starting to show up with those kinds of, like they're starting to use drugs, like you might want to probe more, because it might just be drug addiction, but it might be a deeper context for that drug addiction. And in fact, there was a young man that we rescued during the snowstorm last year, and we got him to a hospital. But one, they didn't know how to do a rape kit on a male, and so they turned him back out. And so then we tried to get him in another program, but they wouldn't take him because he didn't take the drugs, because somebody else gave him the drugs and made him take them. That somehow didn't count.
Mm,
So like,
yeah.
one, I don't understand that, but two, just something to be aware of, that drugs are often caught up in this world as well.
And let me add to that too. There was a ring in Houston that was actually active students at a high school, and most of them were getting paid by gift cards. So they had a big wad of gift cards.
There
Yeah.
you go. That's
Mm,
a good one to add, because that's the thing. Like, people typically think of sex or human trafficking as like this other person, out there, and it's like, no, it's usually somebody that or that the victim knows, and they can be somebody that's close to the same age. It can be a 19-year-old and a 17-year-old, and it can be a female trafficking a male or trafficking another female. It's actually up to 35. I think it's approximately 35% of sex traffickers that we know of are female.
mm. I would love to hear you talk just for a moment about individuals who have been rescued out of these situations, who are receiving care. What are some things if someone, let's say a ministry leader, has someone in their ministry or in a recovery ministry perhaps, that has that as part of their history, something that they've come through? Are there things that they need to know, things that be helpful for them to just be aware of for someone who has had that experience in their past?
Sure, absolutely. That's a great question. Um, all of our residents are interested in spiritual services, to one extent or another, and so we've worked on forming partnerships with local churches to have them come in and provide that spiritual context. So if there's anybody watching that is interested in helping out and being a part of that, please email me, landon@ranchandrescue.org, because we're always looking for new partners to help in that capacity, because a lot of these young people, they were encountered by either a spiritual leader or a medical professional before they were extracted from the life, and it was while they were in the life and they were seeking help. They just didn't have the words to express what was happening to them. A lot of victims don't actually identify as victims, and so that's part of what makes them harder to identify. And because there's not enough education around this stuff, those they encountered just didn't know what questions to ask in order to have the information to get them to help. So it's nobody's fault. It's part of the process here of all of us learning and asking questions. So I mean, the first thing that I would really say to answer your question is, if you get that spidey sense, that empathy sense that something's not right, something feels off, just ask. It's the same with suicide, with self-harm, with drug addiction. Like, just ask, because they might lie to you, sure, and they might say no, but they might also say yes, and that might be the opening that they needed to finally talk about what's been going on for them. So
Mhm.
always, just if you get that feeling, just ask. Um, as far as like things to look for, the highest risk individuals and the highest risk situations are going to be homelessness. So homelessness is a huge risk factor. Again, Glbtq youth, and transgender being the highest risk in that category. Autism and intellectual and developmental disability, it's another high risk population. So if they're reporting odd things that don't quite make sense, then we need to follow up. And then they're going to talk about it more like a kid would. So like even like a young teenager maybe, where it's like um, somebody hurt me and my butt's sore. It's going to sound something odd like that, right? And it's not going to be clear cut, because I mean, I've heard them describe this a million different ways, and there's so many different things that happen, you don't know what they're going to talk about in a given moment. So it's again about recognizing that this sounds odd and this sounds like they were hurt. Let me ask some more questions and get some more information. And it's always good to follow up with like somebody like myself or Carrie, or follow up with some mental health professional who can probe further, or get the CAC involved, or the Children's Advocacy Center, or call your local detectives and ask them, because there's nothing wrong with getting feedback from others that, like, hey, here's what I heard, this seems kind of odd, what do you think's going on, can we do some looking into it? There's also a wonderful group that we work with called For the One Foundation, and they're former detectives who now have their PI license, and their whole thing as a nonprofit is to go find youth who've potentially been trafficked or exploited in some way. And so if you reach out to them, they're also a great source to answer your questions and go, just kind of spitball, like, is this odd? Is this normal? What's happening here? Just get their feedback, and then they can look into it for you. And they're a wonderful, wonderful group of people. They've extracted kids from all over the country. So, again, just as a recap, the main thing is, this person best because they're in your life. And if something seems odd or off, just start asking questions.
Yeah, and I'm sure you see this too. I work at Starlite Recovery, and I work with a lot of parents and family members of people that need treatment, that have been experienced this in their life, human trafficking, and especially the drugs, and it's very traumatic to the family and for the parents that have gone through so much. And that's one thing we can do as Christians, and with our churches, is to rally around the family, because it's a hard thing to not know, and to worry about your loved one maybe for years, and encourage them to get some counseling, and work on themselves and their own relationships, and even after residential treatment, or outpatient treatment, or a step down to sober living or whatever. There's that whole life change, and hopefully they will find their higher power going through the steps, and get back into church. But that's a long process, and a lot of trust and rebuilding.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Landon, thank you so much for coming on. I know this is a huge topic, and we could probably talk for hours about it. Is there anything coming up that you would like to let people that are watching know about, that's related to just being informed about trafficking, or educational opportunities that people can have if they want to plug in and learn more?
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate that context, because this is such a big topic that it's so hard for me to know what's going to be the best information to give you. And that's why I focus on, asking questions when there's a change in behavior, because there is a lot of complexity to this. And that's part of what adds to the challenge of combating it, is the level of complexity. It's not very clear cut. And I can tell you that from experience working with this population. So, first off, today is, Human Trafficking Awareness Day, and then January itself is Human Trafficking Prevention Month. So, connecting with Ranch Hands Rescue and Bob's House of Hope on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You go to our website and learn more. And then, of course, there's other international organizations like A21, and then the Blue Campaign, which is for today about Human Trafficking Awareness Day. So obviously getting connected with those, and being a part of that, and just raising that awareness and letting people know that boys are sex trafficked too, so that we again continue to elevate this conversation for all victims across the span, because it's horrific for anybody that goes through it. And then for us, we have a virtual summit at the end of January, so the 26th through the 28th. It'll be an online course offering, and a lot of it will be pre-recorded, some of it will be live. I believe we're having it as a free event, so I believe it's free to register, and then you can purchase additional content from there if you're interested. But that one, and then there's the Watch Coalition, which is the Wellness Alliance for Total Children's Health. They have a presentation on February 4th, which I'll be providing a little bit more in depth of what we talked about here, which is to speak on the childhood trauma piece that leads to the vulnerabilities that ultimately relates to someone ending up in the world of trafficking. And so I would say that end of January, 1st February, there's some really great resources that go into a little bit more of a deep dive. But again, if you go to our website or follow us on Facebook, you'll get bits and pieces and a little more in-depth conversation, either via our presentations or via blog posts and articles that we submit. So those are great ways to get involved. And of course, always you can email me or Bob, and that's Landon@ranchhandrescue.org or Bob, B-O-B, @ranchhandrescue.org.
In your Facebook page is Ranch Hand Rescue?
Yeah, Ranch Hands Rescue, that's right.
Yeah, I can do that right now.
All right.
Right.
I
Well,
love it.
we will definitely make sure to share those resources. Thank you for being here and for just helping us to bring awareness to this topic and for letting us know about ways that people can connect for those deeper dives into the topic later in the month. We hope that you will connect with those. And Landon, thank you again so much for being here and joining us. We'll be ending our live, but continuing our ministry forum behind the scenes. So we hope that you will connect with us monthly, the first or the second Tuesday of the month. Each Tuesday, second Tuesday, we'll be meeting 11 to 12 via Zoom, and you can find that on the Spiritual Care Network's page, Facebook page. We would love to have you join us. Make sure that you're pressing this out, giving this information to other ministry leaders in your life, because we would love to connect with them and make sure that they are connected with really valuable, important information and education around mental health topics and faith. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you,
Great.
Carrie.
Y'all have a great day.
Thank you, Landon. Thanks for joining us.
Landon.
Absolutely.